Good morning, students. You are welcome to week 3 of GNS202 class, which is all about conflicts and conflict management in Nigeria. This course is designed to let students understand the nature of conflicts in Nigeria and how it is being managed. This particular class, week 3, is all about conflicts and how conflicts is being managed and has been managed in Nigeria. That's the part one of it. Then the part two of it, we'll explore some current issues in Africa over a period of time that concerns us here. But for a start, as I welcome you once again, let us look at what conflict is. And you will be surprised that we have it almost on a daily basis. Conflicts arise mostly when people pursue interests that are incompatible. Interests that are incompatible with each other. Goals, values, needs, expectation, or what we call ideologies. Secondly, conflict could be seen as clashes, competition, or mutual interference of opposing, when we say opposing, or incompatible forces or qualities. It could be ideas, it could be interest, it could be will. So in most cases, when you see two people or groups of people pursuing interests that are not in harmony with each other, then conflict arises there. And we have seen several examples of it over time. Between 1967 and 1970, there was a major crisis in Nigeria, which people have given several names. They've called it Nigerian Civil War. Some people said Nigeria Biafra War. Some people said Biafra War. What led to that conflict was nothing short of incompatibility of goals between the federal government and the seceding eastern region of Nigeria. Howbeit, the conflict ended in such a way that Nigeria did not disintegrate. Several, means were employed to resolve that conflict. In fact, the conflict resulted into open hostility. At the end of the day, both the federal government and the Eastern region had to come to terms to settle that matter. But before that conflict escalated, a lot of effort were made to ensure that that conflict did not degenerate into open hostility. Yet, war broke out. So, It is those mechanisms that we will look at one after the other to know how best some of them have been able to help solve some of these problems. Now, we have different forms of conflict. We have social conflict, political conflict, economic conflict, religious crisis. But in a situation where we have interaction of any one or two value system, there is bound to be conflict. And let me repeat that. In a situation where we have the interaction of one or two or more value systems, there are bound to be conflicts. Nigeria is a multi-religious society. We have Christians, we have Muslims, we have those who also practice traditional religion. Apart from that, we also have various ethnic groups and people who speak several different languages with different cultures and value systems. In a society or a setting like that, conflicts are bound to happen. In other words, conflicts is an inevitable thing in such a society like Nigeria. But all the same, over the years, some of these conflicts, as they had occurred, as they've taken place, have also been managed successfully in some cases and not successful in certain cases. So don't let us, however, assume that conflict is peculiar to Nigeria. It's all over the place. But our own concern here is that how has conflict always been managed in Nigeria? Let us take this and let us note this in particular, that conflicts in Nigeria by nature are either malignant, that is violent, or benign. When we say malignant, that is violent. But when we say benign, we say, well, such conflict that never, really degenerated into violent conflict. I've mentioned the Nigerian Civil War of 1967 to 1970. It was a malignant conflict, very violent, between the Eastern region and the federal government of Nigeria. It was a very violent, conflict. Then there were minor conflicts, too numerous to mention here, that did not lead to any open violence or hostility. We have several examples of that which we can share. But what are the real causes of these conflicts? Or why do we have some of these conflicts? Number one, it could be as a result of misunderstanding. Take, for example, that Nigerian Civil War, which is a classical case of a conflict, whatever in Nigeria. It arose primarily as a result of misunderstanding within a section of the political class, especially the military. When Nigeria got our independence in 1960, the country was a federation of three regions. We have the northern region, we have the western region, we have the eastern region. Then, Nigeria was running a parliamentary system of government. And the Northern People's Congress, then led by Alhaji Tafawa Balewa, won the election in 1960, and their government, their party formed, in coalition with other parties, Northern National Council of Nigerian Cameroon. They formed a government. Unfortunately, unfortunately, that government did not meet up with the expectation of the people. And indeed, in 1966 January, there was a coup led by some majors, 5 majors, within the Nigerian armed forces. We have Fiajuna, we have Nzeku, we have Bule, we have Ademoye, and we have Okafor. When that coup took place, majority of the politicians that were killed were from northern Nigeria. Big politicians like Amadu Bello, Tafawa Balewa, and some members of their families. The governor of Western region here, Akitola, was also killed, and some few. But it happened by coincidence that no major political figure from eastern Nigeria was a casualty of that coup. That was misunderstood now by a section of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who were of northern extraction, believing that that coup was an Igbo orchestrated coup. Lo and behold, then Aguiyi Rosie coincidentally became the head of state and the commander-in-chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces. He was also an Igbo man. In July that year, a counter coup, now took place that eliminated Aguiyi Rosie, who was in company of the governor of the Western region of Nigeria at that time, of the Western region of Nigeria at that time in Ibadan. The July coup was now taken as a revenge mission against the Igbo clan. I'm saying in quote now, who allegedly planned the January coup. Now, the misunderstanding became more complex when the new head of state that was appointed now happens to be Colonel Yakubu Gowon from Plateau State. Plateau State then, from Plateau, that is from the northern region. There was no Plateau State as at that time anyway. From the northern region, but it was from Jos. Easterners saw that as what? A slight upon them. Then the governor of that region, then military administrator of that region, happens to be Odumegwu Ojukwu. Odumegwu Ojukwu considered it an insult that a junior military officer was now appointed to be the head of state and head of Nigerian armed forces against other senior military officers then. You see, as the tension unfolded, there were crises in the north, in various parts of the north and part of western region here, directed primarily against a section of the country, let's say the Easterners. And Ojukwu now directed that all the Easterners should come home. government delegation and delegation from Eastern region, they all went to Abu in Ghana to resolve the matter. They were not able to resolve it until war broke out in July 1967. What the picture I'm trying to let you know here has to do with the fact that the cause of that conflict was misunderstanding. One of the causes was misunderstanding. Because if all the parties had sat down to really appraise the matter, there couldn't have been need for that war. Apart from this, sometimes embarrassment. Someone will feel embarrassed and whatever. Then hot pride too. Then others are prejudice and peer pressures. One of the reasons why Ojukwu went to war was because politicians and statesmen, opinion leaders in the East then mounted pressure on him that this is an opportunity for us to break away from Nigeria and correct the evil, the so-called evil of 1914 amalgamation. You understand? But these are just factors. There are situations which we must now look at. If you look at the perspective through which we look at things, so then difference in our belief system and value system, our personal background, and our objective different, the differences in our objective and interest are the major, factors that usually precipitate these conflicts as we see them. So, if all these things are present in any situation, then there are, sufficient reason for conflict to ensue. Let us now look at the various forms of conflicts in Nigeria. One, political crisis. The Western Region crisis in Nigeria in 1966, 67 was one of the things that precipitated, that preceded that civil war. It was a kind of political crisis. In 1993, an election was held in Nigeria, and the presidential election in particular was held on June 12 that year, 1993. While the election was yet to be concluded, the military government decided to abort that process by not announcing the result, and that election was cancelled. What followed was riot, protests, very violent riots and protests all over the country. Those are examples of political crisis. Apart from that, we have civil unrest. That is mass protest by people, especially students and the youth. We've had Ali must go, in the 80s there, but then we have the NSAS, which is so common to all of us. These are examples of civil unrest. We also have religious crisis. We've had so many of such in the north, like the Mantasini riots, it happened in the north. Boko Haram, it happened in the north. These are religious crises. We also have communal clashes, that is, when two communities come into conflict with each other, especially on boundaries or any other thing. Examples are the Zago Kacha riot in Kaduna, and then we have the Ife Mudakeke crisis in Osun State, present day Osun State. All these are examples of, you know, of forms of crisis or conflicts in Nigeria. Now, coming into the management of these conflicts, there are several strategies for managing conflicts. And in Nigeria, most often, the following have always been employed. One, inquiry. Two, negotiation. Three, conciliation. Four, arbitration. Five, judicial settlement. Six, military intervention and enforcement. This often happens when a crisis has degenerated completely into conflict. Then we also have amnesty. Amnesty usually comes after the end of the conflict, so that we, we can, for example, after the Nigerian Civil War, the federal government declared no victor, no vanquish. That means there is no winner, there is no loser. Now said, okay, let us do rehabilitation, let us do reconstruction, let us do reconciliation. The first, which I mentioned, which is inquiry, is a thorough, careful investigation of the nature and causes of a conflict when such conflict arises. The government or the authorities usually embark on inquiries to know the causes. And in most cases, government usually, you know, is we say panel of inquiry or commission of inquiry. The essence of this panel of inquiry or commission of inquiry is to look at the causes of that conflict and find a lasting solution by making such recommendation available to the government. And in so many cases, it has helped in the management of a number of conflicts in Nigeria. For instance, when President Obasanjo came into power as a civilian president in 1999, afterwards, he set up a panel, he called it the Oputa panel, to look into the cause of major conflicts in Nigeria in the past. And that panel did some impressive job. Then made some recommendations for which the government had to take another look at certain things. Beyond that, another strategy that has been employed in managing conflict in Nigeria is negotiation. That is, to find an independent arbiter who will call it and let us negotiate. Why this conflict? What do we want? How do we go about, solving it, and how we go about not having it again? Then we now have conciliation. Conciliation is more or less to appease those who are, you know, involved in a conflict. Okay, I will take this one, leave this one, take this one to appease them. That's another strategy. Then there is one which we call arbitration. Arbitration and judicial settlement seems to have the same objective. But the difference between arbitration and judicial settlement is that arbitration is only trying to find a way to solve that problem without saying this person is guilty, this person is innocent. You understand? In order to bring about a lasting solution so that the parties involved in that conflict can still cohabit and live together in peace. Unlike judicial settlement, they'll say Mr. A is guilty, Mr. B is innocent, and then award sanction. Arbitration does not award sanction, but in judicial settlement, sanction will be usually awarded against the party that is found to be guilty. But in arbitration, it is not so. Arbitration is meant to reconcile the parties involved in a conflict. Judicial settlement is about taking cases to court. It's about taking cases to court. Let us look at the last presidential election. There was a conflict between the parties that contested it. Some said no, they won. Some said no, this person did not win. They went to court. And the court looked at their cases on the merit of it. And the court was able to come out with its own judgment that, see, this case we have brought before us lack merit for this reason, for this reason, for this reason. In other words, what you are claiming is not valid. So this person actually won this election. That is what judicial settlement is all about. And it takes processes. If you go to the first court and you are not satisfied, you go to another court and appeal. And if that court, that's the appeal board, did not satisfy your demand, you go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest level in the Nigerian judicial system. Once a case is settled there, you can't take it to another court after that. That is what judicial settlement is all about. Then, we now have military intervention. Military intervention as a strategy in managing conflict in Nigeria and anywhere in the world is in most cases an option which is not always necessary, except the crisis or the conflict has degenerated into open conflict, violent conflict. That is where you see the government deploying law enforcement agents and other military or paramilitary agencies to go there and arrest the situation, at least to de-escalate that physical aspect of. For example, there wouldn't have been need for the government to deploy military to pursue Boko Haram, if not for the fact that the Boko Haram themselves were well armed and they've declared war against the masses. So that is how that often comes. And but it's not in most cases for any peaceful, maybe peaceful protesting, whatever. There is usually no need for such intervention. Then we now talk of amnesty. Amnesty is just a situation whereby having resolved a conflict to an extent and you now see the belligerent factions or people, just like in those days in the Niger Delta, when youths took to the creek and whatever and started attacking, kidnapping, demanding for their whatever rights. Likewise, the Civil War period, and likewise during the Boko Haram episode. You see the government being magnanimous in victory to say, let us forgive and forget. And for whoever is willing to surrender and come to our own side, we forgive that person and take that person back, not to be our enemy, but also one of us. Those are the things that, as far as conflict management is concerned, those are the strategies through which conflicts are being managed. And I know by the time we have our test, which is scheduled after this class, I know we should be able to answer some of the questions that come from there. Now, let us quickly look at some few things, few current issues of Nigeria. As you all know, Nigeria happens to be the most populated country in Africa now, with an estimated population of over 200 million people. And aside that, it is also one of the largest economy on the continent. If we take Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, and Algeria together, you see that they are the biggest economies in Africa. What is however important to us is that Nigeria, being a major power in Africa, has contributed to the development of the continent in several respects. Moreover, as far as Africa international relations is concerned, Nigeria is a country to be reckoned with. Number one, Nigeria was among the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963. The OAU later became the African Union in 2002. We should know that. Also, Nigeria was a founding member of ECOWAS in 1975. And currently, Africa is one of the growing regions of the world. And Nigeria, being a foremost country in Africa, has a big role to play in that. The country was formerly ruled by the military until 1999, when civilian administration was reinstated, and that was May 27. May 29, 1999. Civilian government was reinstated in Nigeria. we are certainly going to witness another May 27, May 29 tomorrow. And just last year, the current government was inaugurated. So by tomorrow, the current government should be a year in office. And if by that calculation, you see that democracy in Nigeria, that is the current political dispensation, will be 25 years tomorrow. That is a quarter of a century. The longest so far that Nigeria has ever enjoyed civil administration or civilian rule. Nigeria, is a country of 36 states with a federal capital, Abuja. That means we have 36 state governors and a minister for the FCC. We have a president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. We have a vice president. And the president now, commander-in-chief, is Senator Tinubu. Then we have his vice president. So these are issues that should preoccupy us. I believe that we should be able to answer some of the questions that be asked during the test we will do after this class. But let us look at Africa again. One of the major challenges Africa is facing today has to do with civil unrest and political crisis. You notice that in Niger and Burkina Faso, there were coup d'etat there last year, in which military government took over from civilian administration. Apart from that, we have the challenge of hunger, poverty, and starvation. These are issues that has preoccupied the government ever since. But the major organs through which some of the challenges of Africa are being managed is through the diplomatic mechanism of the African Union. African Union actually was the Organization of African Unity, which transformed to African Union in 2002. So you have to note that the Organization of African Unity was established in 1963, while it transformed into African Union in 2002. We also have ECOWAS, that is the Economic Community of West African States, which was founded in 1975. The objective of ECOWAS was to ensure and facilitate the economic integration of the West African sub-region through the harmonization of tariffs and trade policies as well as monetary policies, so that there could be free movement of goods, services, and people within that West African region. Over time, the ECOWAS had succeeded almost to the point of having its own single currency. But for now, we still hope it to materialize. But as we speak, the region has a unified or a uniform international passport issuance system. if you carry your Nigerian passport now, you see it's ECOWAS, you say ECOWAS. With that passport, you can travel without visa to any country in West Africa. All you need to do to make your movement legitimate is to present yourself before the immigrations at any border post, and they will certainly, you know, grant you entry. That's the essence of that. Let us pause here, and the next 5 minutes, the next 15 minutes will be used for our test.